Listo, Terry. Whenever you are ready, we are ready already. Thank you so much again.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining at today's training. It's lovely to see you all, and I know many people will be watching this recording as well. We put this together very, very quickly because we had been originally planning to do a clinic at the St. Paul and St. Andrew's Church on Monday, in which we were going to be doing one-on-one consultations with people, just talking to them about what their legal needs were. And we realized about 2 days ago that really what we needed to do was to do an emergency planning preparedness clinic. And so this is probably the fastest I've ever put together a clinic and one of these trainings. And I am really going to be grateful to you all for your patience with me as I go through the materials, as we think through together what some of the questions are going to be for our community members and how we can be as helpful as possible during a very stressful time for our communities and for ourselves. So we're giving ourselves hopefully a lot of grace as we sort of walk through this whole process. One of the things I was thinking about before I get started, one of the things I was thinking about were some of us went to this training in Houston, this conference in Houston called the NIC conference. And one of the speakers, actually, she was the keynote speaker. Her name is Norma Wong. She was really grounding, and she provided a lot of very helpful words of wisdom about the benefits of being in community, especially when things are really hard and difficult. And so I thought I would start just to ground us a little bit in, she has this book called When No Thing Works. And there's in the last chapter, I'm just going to read a small passage because I find it helpful for me to think about grounding ourselves in this work, in this collective work that we are doing together in difficult times. And the book is called When No Thing Works, a Zen and Indigenous Perspective on Resilience, Shared Purpose, and Leadership in the Time Place of Collapse. And so I thought, that seems accurate. And so I wanted to read a little passage from a poem at the end that she wrote. We, the keeper of all hopes, suspicious though we may be, fear lurking in all the corners, doubting our own readiness, caught in the innumerable webs of delusion marking, this time, place, and space-time, spinning with seeming chaos, and yet cunningly so by human ambition, not the hue's call. In our stead, the sneering, white-knuckled amygdala of our own making. May we forgive ourselves and move on to that place of maximum possibility. It's a short passage from a longer poem, and I just encourage everybody to look up Norma Wong because she is wonderful. But I thought that would help ground us a little bit. It has been a really long 4.5 days. And I know that we are all feeling the weight of these 4 days and the fear. And so one of the things that I like to do when I'm feeling this way is to be in community with others and to think about how can we work together, how can we pool our collective resources. And so I've been really not at all surprised, but really lifted up by so many of you reaching out to ask if you could come to today's training, asking if you could volunteer on Monday at St. Paul and St. Andrews. And that just sort of is a signal to me that we have each other and we will continue to do so. So I'm going to share my screen to go through some of the training materials that I put together for you all. I'm going to put the link, the public link to the slides in the chat. And this will be a sort of a work in progress, as I said, because I don't have all the answers and nor do any of us. But I'm going to tell you what I know, tell you what I am continuing to learn, and hear from you about what else we can do and think through as we work on putting together safety plans for our communities. These materials and this training, they come from trainings that I and others put together in the first Trump administration while I was working at Bronx Legal Services and as part of the Bronx Immigration Partnership. So the materials that I'm putting together for Monday's clinic will be shared with you, but they are still in development because things are changing constantly. But I'm going to share with you these slides as a way to understand the materials that will be made available to you all over the weekend. And for those of you coming and joining us on Monday at the clinic, and will be provided in physical form. So with that, have all the caveats. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to start by showing the slides, and I'm showing my whole desktop because I want to show some forms as well. But I'm going to start presenting. Okay, so everybody can see the slide that says emergency preparedness training, right? Just
Yes.
give me a head. Okay, so we're going to talk about what it looks like when you're helping people prepare some safety planning forms. And then if we have time, because there's a lot to cover, we'll talk about what ICE enforcement looks like and what has happened this week. But we're going to really try to focus today's training on these forms and what it is when you sit down with somebody and help them create a safety plan. So what is the goal of safety planning? So what I often say when I've done these trainings, you know, in the first term administration, and I believe it very, very strongly, is that we all need a plan, right? It's not about this person making plans for people who are in fear of being deported or detained, but all of us as people who care for other people, who have other people in our lives who depend on us, we all need plans, right? And so that sort of puts us all in the same boat together. Having a plan helps people to feel that they have some control over the future, right? Things that might come up in the future. I just got a little thing that said my internet is unstable. Just let me know if you have trouble hearing me and I'll switch to my plans help to minimize the chances of, you know, really, we're going to be talking about children a lot, but children are people that we care for being placed in foster care, being placed places that we don't want them to be placed. One of the goals also is to have a plan that's realistic. If a plan is not realistic, then it's basically like not having a plan. So we really want to help people think through what is realistic for them and their families. And then, of course, communication is key. So people, if they are coming up with these plans, they really need to communicate what their plans are with the proposed caretakers, with the people that they want to be taking care of their children or the people that they are responsible for. And talking to their children, or, you know, some of these forms are applicable for people who are caring for adults as well, like elderly adults or people who are incapacitated. But talking to people who will be affected by the plans, if it's appropriate, as to what the plans are going to be. So when you're going to be joining in these meetings, I'm going to be sort of shifting back and forth today in terms of speaking generally, but also speaking very specifically about if you're joining us on Monday, or if you're going to be doing your own clinics in your own communities, what to expect, and how you're going to be using the materials that I'm going to be sharing later. So you can expect that a meeting with somebody to go over their plan can take about 45 minutes to an hour. So you want to sort of be aware of that. Our expectation for Monday is that, and we're still, as I said, I have a tendency to build the plane as I fly it. It's something that's very true to me. So that is 100% what I'm doing now as well. So we are planning this clinic for Monday, but the truth is we don't actually know how many community members are going to come on Monday. We are not pre-screening them. We don't need to pre-screen them. We know that on Monday that there are a number of community members who come. They come to what the church calls Miracle Mondays, and they come and they have access to food and clothing and other services that they come to the church for. We don't know if they're going to be afraid to come this first Monday. We don't know if they're going to be not willing to come, we don't know if they're going to come in bigger numbers, right? So we typically, the church sees somewhere between 50 to 100 people. I don't expect for us to have 100 volunteers on Monday. So we're going to be improvising, for those of you who are joining us, which I know that we know how to do, right? That is one of our superpowers, is how to be flexible and improvise. So that all said, is we are imagining that those who are volunteering on Monday will be coming, we'll give you a chance to sign in, let us know that you're there, let us know what languages you speak. Some of you have reached out to me already and have said, I want to come. And we will match you up with the people who come in, and we'll figure out what their languages are and what their needs are. And we might have, depending on the numbers, we might have some people working one-on-one, and we might have some people working like 2 volunteers with one community member. We might have 2 volunteers working with a group of community members. We're not really sure. So this is what we're going to learn together on Monday. And I appreciate your patience and grace, giving us grace as we figure this out. So we're going to, for these meetings, obviously, if you don't speak the language of the person in front of you, then that's where you're going to seek assistance to see if we have interpreters available in that language. We are bringing interpreters are being hired to come, but we don't know how many interpreters we're going to need. So we also ask people to recognize that different community members have different literacy levels. And so most of you are going to be working with people, all of you are going to be working with people with just paper. Like we're going analog. I like to do things digitally, but for this one, we're going analog. We're going to be using paper. And our plan is to have the volunteers have a packet so that they know what to go through with people, and to have the community members have a packet. And so each person in that pairing will have a packet, and you'll sort of go through the packets together. But just understand, and we'll have them in English and Spanish and French, but understanding that there might be other languages that they speak. They might not be comfortable in a certain literacy of a certain language. So just keeping that in mind. And the other thing I often say, and having come from a background of working with people who are survivors and victims of intimate partner violence, is that when we're talking to people about their families, we have to understand, and I'm sure all of you understand this, that people may have experienced different kinds of trauma in their family, right? And so we don't want to make any assumptions about other parents being the right person or other family members being the right person, because we just don't know, right? So we're not going to make assumptions about who is the right person for them to be listing as their emergency person. Okay, so that's just some sort of starting things to think about. When you're meeting with somebody, of course, you're going to introduce yourself. You're going to describe what your role is, right? So you're going to explain that you are there to help them prepare a safety plan. You're not there to provide legal advice. That safety plan is for an event of an emergency. And you're going to also provide them with information on what to do if they have an encounter with ICE or the police. One thing I should have said at the beginning is that the structure for Monday, and again, I know not everybody's joining us on Monday, but the structure for Monday is that we're having everything starting at 9. At 9 a.m., we're going to be giving a training in Spanish for community members. And that training is going to is going to answer some of their questions. We've done, a lot of the people who are coming to the church on Monday, who we expect to be coming to the church on Monday, have been there before, have heard other trainings before. But we like to always have a refresher on what to do if you have an encounter with ICE. And so we will go through that same sort of know your rights, what to do if you have an encounter with ICE on Monday morning at 9 a.m. And we encourage the volunteers who are going to be there with us, especially the ones who speak Spanish, to come and listen and be present and hear what it is we are saying to the community members, because it's the same information that you need to know, right? When you're sitting with someone and they're asking for information. So the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to set expectations, right? You're going to explain that you are not an attorney. If you're not, some of you might be, but if you are not an attorney, you're going to explain, I'm not an attorney. I'm not here to provide legal advice. I'm not You're not actually there to learn anything about their immigration story or the relief that they are seeking, right? You are there to help them prepare a safety plan. And because you will have just listened to the presentation about the Know Your Rights, and we're also going to talk about some of the changes that have happened over the last week during that community training at 9, you will sort of be there with the community member as having all received the same information that morning, right? You will also be explaining that you're going to walk them through a packet of information that has been prepared by attorneys for today's meeting. And that packet will be provided to you. Okay, and then. So I'm going to ask everyone who's volunteering on Monday to sign a confidentiality agreement. So that will be in your packets. Those of you who are joining us on Monday. That confidentiality agreement simply says, I will keep the information I learned today confidential and not share it. And you're going to hand those to those of us who are organizing the clinic. Your packets, the volunteer packets, are also going to have a checklist in them to help you understand, like, to keep the steps in order, right? So there's going to be a checklist: sign confidentiality agreement, introduce yourself to the community member. You're going to make sure that the community member has a copy of the packet. So the volunteer is going to have a packet, and the community member is going to have a packet. They're going to be slightly different, very similar, but slightly different. You're going to ask them to sign a limited scope agreement, which just is an agreement that says, I am here to receive help with filling out a safety plan. I understand I'm not getting any other legal services and that I'm not being represented. And then in their packet and your packet, there's going to be a Know Your Rights sort of handout and a best practices when, working with, looking for an attorney handout, and some sample warrants. So you can say, like, oh, let me show you what's in your packet. Your packet has information that you just heard this morning, but it's also written down in this handout for you, or information about how to find a lawyer, like what to know when you're looking for a lawyer. That's the best practices handout. And here's, you heard people talk about what warrants look like. Here's one. Here is a sample warrant, and it'll be in their packet, and you'll have one in your packet. Then there's going to be a handout in both packets that says creating a safety plan. So you're going to go over that handout with the community member, and I'll show you what that looks like. You're going to review. And we're going to spend most of today talking about this designation of person and parental relationship form. But in the packets, there's going to be a flyer or handout about how to complete that form, and that literally says, like, here's how you complete this form. So you're going to have one, they're going to have one. Then you can help the community member complete 2 copies of that form, the designation of person and parental relationship form, there at the clinic. That's actually the main thing that you're going to be doing. If they want help, right? They may not want help. They may say, I'm not worried about anybody that I'm caring for. So this is not relevant to me, in which case you don't need to help them with that. There is also a shorter form, which we're going to talk about, but there's a shorter form called a designation of a standby guardian. And you're going to review this other handout about, like, this other form. There are going to be lots of forms. So I'm just sort of giving you that knowledge in advance. And you're going to help them, if they want help, completing the 2 copies of the form. I'm going to explain what these forms are and why they might be relevant, but I just want you to know what to expect on Monday. There's also in the packet, there will be a emergency contact and important information form. It's sort of many pages long. You're not likely to fill that out with them on Monday, right? It's a long form. It'll be provided for them in their language for them to go home. They're not going to know their all this information off the top of their head. They're going to have to look it up. I'll show you what it looks like, and you'll let them know, oh, this is in your packet, by the way. If you want help understanding this, I can walk you through some of it and explaining to them, you're going to take this home and fill it out for yourself. Then for people who have children in New York City public school, there's a very simple form letter in the packet to add emergency contacts to the New York City school Blue Card. So if there are if everybody fills out a blue card, I fill out one for my kids, but I filled it a long time ago. And so I haven't updated it recently. And so if there are people they want to add as emergency contacts to that blue card, they can write a letter to the school, and you can help them fill out this template letter to say, like, I want to add these people to as emergency contacts, so that the school knows, oh, contact these people. I'm also planning to put in the packet some US passport application forms for people. We're not expecting, if you have time, you can help them fill out the form. And if, not everybody has US born children. But the reason that we put these forms in the packets often is so people know what forms look like if they want to apply for a US passport for their child, if they are concerned that they're going to be deported and they want to be able to bring their children with them. Your children will need a travel document. There's also, I often put in power of attorney forms. They're quite long and complicated, so I do not expect people here to help people fill them out. But I often put them in the packet so people have them. And these are to give people control over their assets and other usually financial matters. So I don't expect you all, and we're not going to cover today how to fill out a power of attorney form, but I do like to put them in the packet so people have them if they want to sort of take it home and sort of try to decide if they want to fill it out. There'll be a meeting checklist. So you'll complete 2 copies of the meeting checklist. One, it's the same checklist, but one that we'll keep, and then one you'll give to the community member so that they know what they were given that day. Okay. So I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about this form called the Designation of Person and Parental Relationship form. It is a form that it's a New York State form. And what it does is it designates somebody, so a parent is able to designate somebody with the temporary care. So I'm going to just read this. This is sort of the language in the form. The designee, so the person that you're designating, is being temporarily entrusted with the care of a child or incapacitated person, and they're being given certain powers that are listed on the form. This form does not change the parent's rights or the caregiver's rights over the child or the incapacitated person. It gives additional rights to the person they designate. So the designee has to be 18 years or older. And obviously it's someone that is chosen by the parent or the caregiver, right? So, and the parent, I'm going to use parent as a shorthand, understanding that you can also use this for what is called incapacitated persons. But like, imagine if you're caring for a parent and they need you're doing a lot of the caretaking for that parent. We'll include those as well. But for shorthand, I'm going to just say, I'm going to use parents and children as the example. So parents can decide how long they want this authority to be granted, and under this document. So even on the form, it'll say, do you want this to be 12 months from the date of the signature, 30 days from the date of the signature? Do you want a specific time frame, or do you want a triggering event? And we're going to use the triggering event. I'm going to explain it in a minute. So these are the powers that are listed. They're explicitly listed on the form already. So they give the power, and the parents can check off which of these they want to apply. So to review school records, to enroll a child in school, to excuse absences from school, to consent and participation in school programs or school-sponsored activity, to consent to school-related medical care, to enroll in health plans, to consent to immunizations, to consent to general health care, dental care, medical procedures, and to consent to developmental screening, mental health evaluation, and mental health treatment. So the form also gives the designee the power to request, receive, review, and have full access to all information relating to health, medical, and financial information. And the form has a release of liability. So it specifically says, like, if this information falls into the wrong hands, like, the parent releases the designee from responsibility. You don't have to put an expiration date if you pick option but New York State law says that this form is only supposed to be in effect for 12 months from a triggering event. So it should be renewed if the event lasts longer than the 12 months. Okay, so on the form itself, and I'm gonna just show you what the form looks like for a second so you have an idea of what we're talking about. So not that. To move my Zoom screen out of the way. Okay, so this is the form itself. And I'm gonna see if I can make it a little bigger so we can look at these two things side by side, because I think that'll be a little more helpful for you all. Okay, so we see, so the form itself, the form lives on the New York State Office of Children and Family Services website, and it lives in many languages. Not all languages, but it lives in many languages. And so I will provide a link. I didn't get a chance to do it yet, but I will provide a link to the website so you can see all the different forms. But here you see, so paragraph 1, and then you write the name of the parent. So I hope people can see the side by side, the form and the slides. Yeah, I'm seeing people nodding their heads. So I'm going to leave it like this just so it's a little easier for you to know what you're dealing with. So and that's the name of the parent or the person who's responsible for the incapacitated person. I hereby state that I am the parent of the child, children, or incapacitated person, and there are no court orders now in effect in any jurisdiction that would prohibit me from exercising the power that I now seek to authorize. So that's what paragraph 1 is. So when you guys are helping people fill out this form on Monday or in your own clinics and community events, you're going to write the name of the parent, right? You're going to just literally handwrite the name of the parent. Number 2, the name and telephone number where I can be reached while this designation is in effect is, so then you list an address and you list a phone numbers, right? You could also, I realize now I'm looking at it, you can even put an email address. It doesn't call for an email address, but you can put an email address. So we typically, because this form, the thing that people have questions around with respect to this form is like, who has this form? Who gets this form, right? The form is given to whomever the parent or the designee decides to give it to, right? It doesn't get filed in court. Typically, this form, though, would be given to the school. So oftentimes, when I've done these trainings in the past and it's come up, I often have said, like, I think it makes sense for you to write down a safe address and phone number where the parent can be reached. Because you may not want a document that you hand to a school or that you hand to a doctor to have an address on it that you are concerned that ICE might show up at that address, right? Because you don't have control over who the school gives the form to, right? We assume that the school is going to keep it confidential. We assume that the healthcare provider will keep it confidential, but you just might want to think as the person who's filling out this form or for yourself, what address do I really want to be on this form, right? So I often say, maybe don't use an address or a phone number for people who are at risk. Sometimes that's impossible, but it is something to think about. So paragraph 3. So I am temporarily entrusting. And so this is where you write the name of the person or the designee that the parent wishes to trust with the healthcare and educational responsibilities. So it is saying I'm temporarily entrusting this person, a person over the age of 18, and then you put an address for that person and their phone number. And then you list the names of the children or incapacitated persons and their dates of birth, right? Often a question that comes up all the time is, can I designate somebody who doesn't have immigration status? Yes, you can designate whoever you want, but you also just want to be, as we said at the beginning, realistic about, do you want this form to be functional? And you may not want to list somebody who's at more risk, who has a greater risk than you do, right? So that's just something to think about. And again, you want to put an address that you think is a good address that could be shared in the world if it were to be shared. So paragraph 4 is where you're going to select the time period that the form covers. So there's this, you should see the 12 months, the 30 days, and the specific time period. So I propose that people check off option 4D, and then they have to initial that they've checked that off. And then commencing upon, and then I advise people to write my detention or deportation by U.S. immigration officials, and then as the commencing upon, and then continuing until, and then I write this designation expires. And the reason that I encourage people to do that is because you don't want this document to go into effect on Monday, right? You don't want it to be 12 months from Monday, because you don't need it 12 months from Monday, right? You need it 12 months from the time that the triggering event happens. And so that's why we encourage people to put my detention or deportation by U.S. immigration officials continuing until the designation expires. So this page 5, or paragraph 5 in the second page, is where you're going to list the power. You're going to sort of check off or cross off the powers that you want the person that you're designating to have. So if you want to be able to review school records, you're going to check off review school records. If you want them to enroll in school, and so on. And you might want to put some conditions, right? So this part of the form says any of the above authorizations may be further limited by conditions defined by the parent, and if limited, the limitations are written below. So that you can say, actually, they can only consent to these kinds of medical procedures, or they can only consent to this kind of dental care. And that's where the parent would list any additional conditions. So the next part of the form, so paragraph 6 is authorizing the designee to receive all the information I was talking about earlier. And paragraph 7, it explains the parent's rights to revoke this designation. And they're always allowed to revoke it. They can revoke it at any time. And they can revoke it, and I think I have a slide on this, but they can revoke it by notifying the school, notifying the healthcare providers that it's been revoked. They can notify the person who's been designated that it's been revoked. They can rip it up. They have rights to revoke this. So paragraph 8 is where, so the parent will sign, and then paragraph 8 is where the second parent signs. So if there's a second parent who has the rights, who has, I'm just going to read this to you. So the first section, right, is the first parent signs. The second, paragraph 8 says, I, and then lists the second parent, I am also the parent of this child. There is a court order directing that both parents must agree on education and or health decisions concerning my child, and I hereby consent. So you need to write a second parent's name if there is a court order that says that you both have joint custody to make decisions with respect to education or healthcare decisions, or if there's an order that says the other parent has sole custody to make these decisions. So if there's no custody order, there's no order that says both parents have to make these decisions, or this other parent gets to make the decision, one parent's signature is sufficient. But if there is a court order that says both parents have custody of the child and both parents have to decide these educational and health decisions, then the second parent has to sign, and they have to list their information. And all the signatures, so the parent signature, the second parent signature, and the designee's signature have to be notarized. I am a notary. I think we might have one or two other notaries joining us on Monday, but I will make sure to bring my notary stamp and make sure that I'm able to notarize everything. We don't expect, most of the time people don't bring their designated person with them to these kinds of clinics. So they probably won't have that person with them. They might, but they probably won't. In which case they're going to take it home with them, and then they'll get it signed by the designee, and they'll just make sure that they get it signed in front of a notary. So that's the form. It's a very straightforward form. You're not filling out very much, right? You're putting in names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of children, the date, how it's triggered, and then what authorities you're giving to the designee, and then you're signing. So that's not going to take the full 45 minutes to an hour, but it is sort of what we wanted you all to be aware of. So a couple of things just to repeat. So signatures have to be notarized. The parents are the ones who should have the copy of the form, and they should give the original to the designee, because the designee is the one who's going to need it, right? The parents most likely, they want to have a copy of it, but the whole point of the form is to give somebody else some of these powers. So you want the designee to have the original form. The form does not need to be filed with any court. And we're going to talk about standby guardianship in the next slide. But this form is something that is given to schools, it's given to healthcare providers, but it's not filed with the court. And as I said, it can be revoked at any time by the parents. Okay, so that's all the OCFS designation of person and parental relationship form. There's also something in New York called standby guardianship. Standby guardianship has been in existence for a long time, but only in 2018 did the law change to allow immigrants who were at risk of being separated from their children to use it. So before, it was only for people who had some kind of terminal illness. Now, starting in 2018, the law was amended for parents who might experience what's called an administrative separation and who provide consent for this form to be used. And it's a little bit more complicated than the OCFS. It's more complicated and less complicated in different ways. I'm going to explain it as clearly as I can. So what do they mean by administrative separation? So I'm going to just tell you what the law says. I'm going to try to say it in as plain language as possible. But basically, the parent, the person who is responsible for the child or the incapacitated person, if they, in connection with a federal immigration arrest, detention, incarceration, removal, and or deportation, or they receive communication from federal, state, or local law authorities regarding immigration enforcement that gives them reason to believe that their care of their child is going to be interrupted. That's what administrative separation is. So that would be the triggering event, assuming that there is consent from the parent to appoint the standby guardian. So also with standby guardianship, parents do not give up their rights, even when the authority has started. So even when the triggering event happens, the parents are not giving up their rights to the child. Their rights live alongside the child, alongside the standby guardian. And it only goes into effect when the parent cannot care for the child because of this triggering event. And the benefit of standby guardianship is that it does allow parents to address some potentially complicated legal issues in advance. So if there's going to be some dispute about who should be in charge of that child, who should be making these decisions, it helps them to make these, have a court help them make these decisions in advance. So there are two ways to appoint a standby guardian. One is by written designation, and that only lasts for 60 days after the triggering event, unless the designee formally petitions the court, or you can petition for a court appointment of the standby guardian. So the form itself is very simple, and I don't think I have. Let me just see. I'm just going to check something. So this is a memo that was issued by the New York State court system on these forms, but I don't think the form has this. I'm gonna dig it up from somewhere else. Yeah, these are the court forms, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But there's another form. Just give me 1 minute. I've got to stop sharing for 1 second. So there is another form. Okay, so it is this form. So here, let me move these two, move this, so you can see them side by side. So this form, it's like I said, in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's more complicated, this whole system, right? So this form, let's see if I made it a little bigger for you. is this designation of standby guardian. So it's the name of the parent. So we're going to provide you with these forms. You put the name of the parent, you hereby designate the designee with an address, with a phone number. And you can see it here, it says, as standby guardian of the person, property, or person and property of my children. And so we would recommend, if people want this form filled out for them, we recommend that they pick person and property if they want that. But obviously, it's their choice. And then you'll have them select which box is appropriate. And then they're going to write the name of the child. And then they'll write the name of the designee again. So the appointment of, and they'll write the name of the designee as standby guardian of the person and or property of my children would be in their best interests because, and this is where they would actually write, this person has known my child since they were small. This person is someone that I trust. This person is someone my child wants to be left with, all the reasons why. I realize it's a short, there's only a couple little lines here. But this form, as I said, is only going to be good for 60 days anyway, because then the person has to then file in court if they want to have a longer guardianship. But they can put sort of as best they can in those few sentences. And then the form says, the standby guardian's authority shall take effect if my doctor concludes in writing that I am mentally incapacitated and unable to care for my child. So that's relating to the original purpose of this law. Number two, if my doctor concludes that I'm physically debilitated and unable to care for my children. And number three, this is where it is relevant for our purposes. If I become subject to an administrative separation such that the care and supervision of the child will be interrupted or cannot be provided or upon my death. So there again, they ask, in the event I designate the above is unable, there's an opportunity on this form to put a second person. So in the event the person I designate above is unable or unwilling, I hereby designate, and then you can put a second person. This form does not have to be notarized, but it does have to be signed in the presence of two witnesses. And so obviously, if you're helping somebody fill out this form on Monday, you can be the witness and have somebody else be the witness and have the person sign. So this form, as I said, is only good for 60 days from the triggering event. And it has to be filed with a future petition for guardianship by the standby guardian. It can be revoked by a subsequent designation of guardianship or notifying the guardian verbally or in writing. So again, it gives parents a lot of control over revoking these forms. And we're not going to get into it in detail because you're not going to be doing it on Monday, but there is a petition for standby guardianship on the court's website. It's also here, and I will provide it in their packet so that they have it. But so this petition for a standby guardian is something that does need to be filed in the family court. And I'm telling you all this not because you're going to be doing it on Monday, but because I want you to have the information so that if somebody wants to pursue the sort of going to court, they can go to court themselves and the court can help them fill out the form. The courts thankfully have these family help centers, family court help centers, and they can help them fill out the forms as needed. But I want you all to know that this process exists, not that you're going to be engaging in the process yourselves. So the process, and I think it's helpful for you to know this process, is there's a petition for a standby guardian that is filed in the family court or the surrogate's court. It requires the consent of the person who's petitioning or the parent. There will be registry checks with the State Central Registry of Child Abuse and everyone in the household. And the parents have to consent to the standby guardianship or be served with a notice of the proceeding. And a child who's 14 years or older must consent or be given notice. So I'm not going to get in. I have slides here because I want you all to have the information, but I'm not going to spend time on the slides because in family court on Monday, or generally speaking. There is information in these slides, though, for you all to review later. There is lots of requirements with respect to service. I provided links as to how people can file these. They actually can file them electronically if they want to prepare it on their own. But often I tell people to go to the family court. That is literally what the family court is there for, the help center, to help people file these forms themselves. And they do help people, they do provide interpretation. But if people want to file it themselves, they can file it online, or you can help them file it online without being a lawyer. There's a second way to file if you are a lawyer, which I provided some slides for. But again, I'm going to rush through these because we're not going to be doing this on Monday. And again, this is information about what happens in court hearings. So that was very, very quick. And I want to just take a moment to see if there are questions about what I provided or about what I've said already. I also want to show you sort of what this packet's going to look like. It's not done yet because it's just not done yet. But the packet is going to be in, they're going to have an outline for what to expect, what the outline of your client meeting should look like. And you'll see this is information we just covered. So this is all information we just talked about. Here's what the checklist, I'm going to make a couple small tweaks to it, but here's what the checklist will look like. That makes it clear. Here's one, I'm going to update this too, but here's a Know Your Rights handout. Here's a best practices handout. And here's the creating a safety plan handout. So it's going to talk to people about creating this list of emergency contacts and important information, keeping a file of their important documents. So you'll go through this with them, right? You'll talk to them about how it's important to keep a file of their important documents, an electronic file and a physical file, and having it be with someone that they trust. You're going to talk to them about meeting with their family members and caregivers to discuss plans. Talk to them about maybe saving money for a bond or bail. This, Carol, I see your hand. Okay, I'll answer in just a moment. I just want to get through the packet. The emergency contacts form looks like this. So it has, and again, you're not going to be filling this out most likely. You're just going to show them, oh, look, this is where you can fill out your emergency contact information and the children's information. So this, we encourage people to have this stuff written down. Again, it's good for all of us to have this kind of stuff written down. Child's name, date of birth, if the child has a cell phone number, where their school is, who their teachers are, what their after school is, medications that they're taking, what their allergies are, what their favorite foods are, what books they like, what their bedtime routines are. My kids are 11 and 15. Gosh, 15? Yeah, he's 15. I can't quite wrap my head around that. And yesterday, my 15-year-old, he sleeps with this little lovey, this little duck that he's had since he was a baby. He couldn't find it. He's like, we call him Mr. Duck. Couldn't find Mr. Duck. So even my 15-year-old has a bedtime routine and has, Mr. Duck he needs it to go to sleep. So that's the kind of thing I would put on a form. And we have it for multiple children. And then special needs of adult family members. There's obviously, we care for a lot of people in our lives. And so there might be other family members that we would want to have people fill out information for. The form also has their attorney name and phone number, their consulate name and phone number, their employer's name and phone number, their medical providers, the medications that they take, their assets. So, again, you're not going to be filling all this out on Monday, but you're going to show them this is something you can fill out at home and make sure you have a copy of it and give it to people, take pictures of it so you have it, give it to people that you trust. This is the completing the OCFS designation of person and parental relationship form. This is not the form itself. This is how you fill it out, but you will have this in your packet. They'll have it in their packet. And this is the letter to the schools about adding people to the blue card for emergency pickup. And I'm going to add a couple other things to the packet. But that's sort of a really quick, very, very quick overview of what to expect when you're helping people fill out these emergency safety plans. I can't quite land on what I want to call it. Sometimes I call it safety plan. Sometimes I call it emergency preparedness. I don't have the right exact language because it's sort of everything at once. But I'll pick one by Monday. Carol, did you have a question? Okay, let me know if you change your mind. The safety plan documents.
No,
just
I'm sorry. Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
I want to echo what Rashmi was putting in the chat. I have the same question about accessing the packet information before Monday so that folks have a chance to absorb it all before the chaos of Monday morning. And then my second question is, how many attorneys will be present to oversee and check with the volunteers?
That's a good question. I think there's not going to be very many attorneys present, to be totally honest with you. I think there's going to be two. There might be a couple who join us, but as I said, and Carol, you might not have heard this. You may not have heard me say at the very beginning. We are going to be improvising a bit on Monday, so we decided to throw this together very quickly because that was what the need is, and I've done, just so people know, like I've done these clinics a lot. I did them when I was at Bronx Legal Services, and each one was different because the population is different, the needs are different. We're in a totally different environment right now. So I want to say again that we are building the plane as we fly it, as I tend to do, but we have experience flying these kinds of planes. So I don't know if that's helpful. To answer your question about the materials, I typically email out links to the materials the day or two before, and I will do that. I am just thinking, I want to make sure all the information keeps changing with respect to all the news we're getting about ICE raids. And so I want to provide as up-to-date know your rights information as possible based on all the sort of news reports. But I am planning to email those out over the weekend. The packets that will be, because I also have to send them to Staples to print 100 copies. And it will be available in English and Spanish. We do have a French version. And if I can get a French interpreter to help me make sure that the translations are up to date, I will bring a French version as well. Isabel, thank you for the backup. So as she's saying, attorneys are not needed. You don't have to be an attorney to fill out the forms. And the reason people like to have attorneys is they have questions, right? They want to be able to ask their questions, and they ask them of the volunteers and the volunteers ask them of the attorneys. But typically it's about, this is where you put this person's name, this is where you put the child's name, this is the dates that you put in, and so on. Go ahead, Isabel.
Yeah, if you can confirm what I remember, we always tried to make sure that folks had an English version of what they completed as well. So even if you are completing it in Spanish, they should really try to go home with an English one, because if they are going to be using this with a school or some other city agency, you're going to want whoever they interact with to not throw it back in their face and say, I can't read this. So it's just easier for whoever you're helping.
Yeah, thank you for that note. Yes, we agree. I agree. We do need to have both the in their own language and in English. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, that was 1 hour. I'm happy to stay on and answer some other questions and talk about some other things about ICE enforcement and some of the things we've been seeing. But that is the part of the presentation about emergency planning. And so feel free to drop off if you have to go.
Carrie, do you mind? Can I just say one thing before?
Yeah.
This is Becky. Hi. And the folks from Bronx Legal Services will also be there on Monday in case there are folks who have questions about public benefits eligibility for non-citizens and public charge questions. So if you run into folks, we'll be at the back, we'll have a table and we'll announce it before you guys do your presentation, Terry, but we'll also be doing public charge screenings in case that comes up during consultations.
Thank you, Becky. I'm enjoying hearing the parenting going on in the background there.
Fun times.
Okay, so with that said, I actually remembered that VIA has something at 2 o'clock. So we'll end there, but we will certainly be having some future conversations
No, be
about.
my guest, Terry. Sorry for the interruption. Be my guest, continue, because I am the only one who have to leave, but Hector and Wendell will be in charge of the Zoom room. So be my
Okay.
guest and continue with the rest of your presentation. Mhm.
Thanks, Nirka. So I have some time. I know I didn't want to sort of overstay my welcome on VIA's Zoom, but I do have some time and I can answer some questions. I can try to answer some questions about what we're seeing. Can you guys give me like a reaction button to see if you want me to stay on and answer some questions and talk about what we're seeing in this week? If you want that. Okay. Nirka gave me a thumbs up even though she has to go, which I think is funny. Okay. So I will stay on, but nobody should feel like they have to stay on. I will not be at all offended if you drop off. So I'm gonna go through some additional slides that I have just to sort of help people know sort of some basic Know Your Rights stuff, but also sort of what has happened in the last week. And I won't spend too much time on the basic Know Your Rights stuff. But we know that ICE is making arrests. They're making a lot of arrests right now. They're doing it in public. They're going to homes, they're going to workplaces. And obviously they make arrests in their own offices, and they just rescinded the sensitive locations memo as well. The arrests that we're seeing often happen in the early morning, although frankly, they do seem to be happening lots of times of day, but typically they happen in the early morning. Typically, if they're going to a home, they're knocking on doors between 5 and 7 a.m., or they're waiting outside for people to go to school or to work. But we are seeing during the day them making workplace raids. This is a photo of what they look like. So this was taken 2 days ago. They were in Glen Clove and Long Island. And so the reason I put this in is because I was doing a training yesterday and someone was like, what do they look like? So I was like, oh, I have a photo, unfortunately. But they often wear plain clothes, right? So they're wearing plain clothes with a vest on top. So you can see that, and there's multiple units within ICE. So there's enforcement and removal operations. So that's what ERO stands for. And there's also the one behind him is wearing an ICE vest for HSI, which stands for Homeland Security Investigations. And they're often accompanied by local law enforcement, not always, but often. Another thing that people asked us at a training yesterday was, are they armed? And the answer is yes, they are often armed. So they use administrative warrants or probable cause to make arrests in public. And in private, if they're going to enter some kind of private dwelling, they need a judicial warrant or consent to enter, question and search. Or if they're in a quasi-private space, they often rely on local cooperation or what are called detainer agreements, where they issue a detainer with a local law enforcement that says, hold this person for me until I can come get them. The administrative warrants are signed by supervising agents, ICE agents, and they identify the person to be arrested, but they don't give ICE the authority to enter private spaces, including homes and workplaces. And so the administrative, often we tell people, ask for a warrant, but if it's a ICE warrant, that does not give ICE permission to enter into a dwelling. And so you do not have to consent to them coming into your workplace, into your home, with just this administrative warrant. And we're going to give samples of those in the packets for Monday. The judicial warrant is different and something that ICE almost never has. And it's signed by a judge that gives entry authority to enter and arrest a specific person. It has a specific time frame on it. And it overcomes the Fourth Amendment protection. And so somebody can choose not to open the door, but if ICE has a judicial warrant, they will break open the door. The judicial warrant is signed by a judge. So what we tell people is, if there is a judicial warrant and somebody's in that home or in that dwelling, and they, let's say they don't have an escape route, if they come outside, then ICE can't come into the home or the dwelling, right? So that, because the warrant is about the person. So if they choose to follow the warrant and they choose to present themselves to ICE in order to protect the other people in the home, then they can do that, and they can just leave the door, close the door behind them, and now ICE no longer has the ability to go into that home. So things that ICE often says is, they call themselves police, they demand that people open up, they tell people they have a warrant and they're coming in anyway, they ask for ID, and they threaten, like, oh, show me your ID now, or I'll arrest you and we can figure it out later. So those are some of the things that ICE will often say. And for areas that are, sorry, I can't see because the Zoom thing's in the way, so I can't see I'm just gonna move this for a second. There we go. I couldn't read the header. What about ICE in public spaces? So those are areas that are free to the public, that the public can move around. ICE is allowed to be in those spaces. But just because an area has some public space doesn't mean it's all public, that whole building is all public space. So we really encourage people to have signage for this is a private area, to make it really clear where the Fourth Amendment protections exist. So we often encourage people, like, if they have a reception area that has previously been open to the public, like anyone could come and buzz people in, and now you've created the private space that you need to have that Fourth Amendment protection. Even if ICE, though, is in a public space, they can't harass or disrupt an organization's activities, and they can be asked to leave just the way that anyone can be asked to leave. So ICE check-ins, people I'm sure know that they're a really routine way for ICE to track people under their supervision. Many times people, and this will be happening a lot, people who have removal orders and they go to their ICE check-ins we will probably be seeing them be detained and moved. And if family members go with them to these check-ins, they will likely also be subject to being detained or removed. I just always want people to know about the ICE out of courts work that was done in New York that prevents ICE from making arrests at New York State, city, and municipal courts without a judicial warrant. And there's a court rule in New York that says that, and there's also a law that says they can't make these arrests at a court without a warrant, and they cannot arrest people going to court or leaving court under the New York State Protect Our Courts Act. And the law also requires ICE officers to identify themselves to court officials. Okay, so what are some of the things that we know has happened in the last week? So it's a long list. It's not it doesn't have everything on it, because that's almost impossible at this point, because they literally are changing things every day and multiple times a day. Some of the things that we know are that they've ended CBP 1, and they have reinstituted or plan to reinstitute they call them the migrant protection protocols, also known as the remain in Mexico policies. So they've effectively closed the border, the southern border and the northern border. And anyone who wants to seek asylum is unable to do so by presenting themselves at a port of entry or, with their CBP 1 appointment. They shut down the app. They are rapidly expanding something called expedited removal. And expedited removal is a form of proceedings where there's no judge. You don't get to see a judge. Typically, it was only used for people who had been here for less than 2 weeks and were within 100 miles of the border. They are intending to expand this because under the statute, there's some flexibility there for people who've been here for less than 2 years. And so what we're seeing is people who've been here for less than 2 years, even if they were paroled in, are being targeted with expedited removal. And this is per their own memorandum that they issued last night. So people who entered with one of the parole programs, the Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti, the CHNV, I always get the letters wrong, the wrong order. We know that they've ended that program, but they also last night said that they're going to target people who entered with parole. So people who are here lawfully with expedited removal. So we also, there was some back and forth on one of the groups that I'm on this morning, seeming that they may even seek to end removal proceedings for people who've been here for less than 2 years, meaning that the ICE officers or ICE prosecutors would seek to terminate any case where someone has been here for less than 2 years so that they don't have an opportunity to present their requests for relief in front of an immigration judge so that ICE can do expedited removal. And so this changes things a lot because we have always, and this was true under the first Trump administration, was true under the Biden and Obama administrations, that if you were in court, you were presumed to be able to request whatever relief you wanted to in court. But now it seems that they're going to say, we don't care if you're here with parole. We don't care if you're here with TPS. We don't care if we let you, we paroled you in under these programs. We don't care if you have a sponsor. If you've been here for less than 2 years, we're going to target you with expedited removal. And expedited removal is really just a removal by ICE that does not give somebody the chance to present themselves. I'm spending a lot of time on this particular one because it's sort of breaking my brain a little bit. But under the law, someone is still supposed to be able to say, I have a fear of returning to my country. And if they say that, they're supposed to be given a credible fear interview. So we encourage people, even if they are here under parole, even if they've not yet filed for asylum, to be able to say, either all those people, if they haven't yet, should file for asylum with the USCIS. But if they are also targeted by ICE for expedited removal, they should say, I have a fear of return. I am afraid to go back to my country. And that is under the law supposed to trigger a credible fear interview before they can be removed. Let's take a breath. We know that I talked earlier about the sensitive locations memo being rescinded. So that is the memo that was 2011, I think, that protected houses of worship, schools, hospitals from being sites of ICE enforcement. So ICE has rescinded that memo and almost all Biden era policies that had to do with priorities for enforcement and on lots of policies. But one of the main policies was a listing who was a priority for enforcement. And so that has been removed, which means that the ability to seek something that we call prosecutorial discretion is greatly limited at this point, because basically the Trump administration has said everybody is a priority for enforcement. There are threats to DACA and TPS. There was a case on Friday, which in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said that DACA is substantively illegal, but they only applied the ruling to Texas, and they stayed they basically kept the program in place for everybody who has DACA now, but it's still in a very precarious state. There's also been an executive order to end birthright citizenship, which was just, there was just an injunction against that executive order that was issued by a judge out in Seattle. But it's currently that injunction's only good for a couple of weeks right now. But he had some choice words for the administration. There's also been the gender extremism directive, which is a really harmful directive, which says that people, they're sort of incorrectly states that there are only 2 genders, and it requires that federal documents only be issued in the sex assigned at birth. which includes, immigration related documents. And so we know that this is going to be really harmful for many of our clients. And so I just wanted to make sure it's on people's radar. In some of the executive order, one of the executive orders talks about a program to register, like requiring registration of undocumented people. We've seen this before under the Bush administration through a program called NSEERS. And there's not language yet as to what they anticipate this looking like, but there are fines and penalties that are contemplated for people who don't register, the chief among them being most likely that they would be deported. I talked about closing the borders. There's the Lake and Riley Act is this really sort of mean-spirited bill that requires mandatory detention of people who are arrested for theft crimes. So, and some other things. So, like you could be arrested for shoplifting and then subject to mandatory detention if you don't have immigration status. And then, of course, there's directives to expand detention and deportation across the country. And there's also in the executive orders language that ends all paths to relief for people who enter after January 20th, 2025, if they enter undetected. There's also, they talk about the Alien Enemies Act. And so there's some concern. It's actually what was used to intern people during World War II, intern Japanese Americans during World War II. And they talk about designating groups as terrorist groups. And so we are concerned about this because we know that oftentimes young people in particular are often sort of funneled through this like school to prison pipeline where they get labeled as gang members. And so we're concerned that this is sort of laying the groundwork for a lot of false accusations of MS-13 behavior, and therefore being able to summarily deport people without any kind of process, any kind of due process. There's language in the executive orders that say that they want last time they did travel bans, often called Muslim bans, and they were stopped in the courts, but now the executive orders are saying like, we are giving agencies 60 days to report on the countries that don't have sufficient security protocols. And so they're trying to lay the groundwork to defeat those lawsuits that could come in as a result of the travel bans. I talked already about ending humanitarian parole programs. So they've both ended the programs and now are also targeting people who entered with those parole programs. Ending refugee programs and ending the immigration court help desk and legal orientation programs has already started. So that's a lot, and not really the note I wanted to end on. But I feel like I know that it's really overwhelming for me to see all these memos all the time. And you hear all the news. And so sometimes I find it helpful to just get like a little digest, literally in the hour before this training, I was listening to someone do exactly what I just did, sort of read through them all and provide like a quick summary of the key points. I see Jesse's hand up and I see some questions in the chat, which I haven't been able to see, but go ahead, Jesse, and then Paula, and then I'll try to answer some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you very much for all these efforts that you're putting in terms of helping us to understand better what is going on. I have a question regarding what's going on specifically, or what is your recommendation when we see something like happened yesterday with this veteran that was trapped in the middle, probably in a raid, and it was said that he presented his ID as a veteran, and it was still took into custody. Apparently, I don't have more details about what happened. And also after ICE stating something like they can encounter U.S. citizens while they are, holding this field work, and they will request the ID. So, for example, I'm a green card holder. So for people like maybe I have to bring my green card everywhere, but for people in general that only have an ID, how it works. What is, in your experience, your recommendation regarding how we can be, you know, more, let's gonna say, well identified when we are out?
Yeah, very good questions. And others should also feel free to chime in. I don't need to be the only person speaking, because it's a conversation that we're having, right? But what I can say, what I didn't talk about, because I kind of rushed through it, is I typically tell people they have the right to remain silent. They do not need to show their ID. Obviously, if they are taken into custody because they don't show their ID, that is a possibility. But I encourage people not to show ID that has their country of origin on it, which a green card does. Obviously, as a green card holder, you have more protections. But work permits are a good example, right? So many times people, they might be asked to show ID. They're going to show their work permit because it's a document that's been issued by the government, that the government knows that they're there. The government has given them this document because they have parole, right? And they might show that ID, the employment authorization document. And as soon as they do that, they're giving evidence to ICE that they were not born in the United States because it has their country of origin on it. Green card holders are a different story. So I'm going to just speak about the people who are showing ID that has their country of origin on it. In New York City, we have the NYC ID, which does not have a country of origin on it. So we've often encouraged people to get an ID NYC so that if they are asked for ID and they feel like they can't refuse that request to show ID, then they have something to show, right? That does not show their country of origin. That said, you are not required to show an ICE officer your ID. You're just not, like, you don't have to give them anything. You don't have to say anything. The only thing you should say to them is, am I free to go? Right? If they say no, you're not free to go, then you say, I want to speak to my lawyer, right? That's all we'd encourage people to say. I don't encourage people to carry around their proof of, you know, where they were born, or their passports, or their work permits. They should have a copy of it somewhere, right, where someone can access it. But it's ICE's burden to show that that person was not born here, or that they've been here for less than 2 years if they're trying to do expedited removal. So we don't want to do anything to help them meet their burden, right? We know that they're going to be racially profiling people because that is what they do. So if the only thing that they have done is heard somebody speaking in another language and then arrested someone, that's not probable cause, right, to arrest somebody. That is racial profiling. And so we encourage people not to cooperate with them, not to give them, not to fight them, not to resist them, not to lie, but not to give them any information that helps them make their case. So I didn't fully answer your question, and we can talk offline about your situation, but in general, that's the advice that I give. Paula?
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry, for all of this. I have a question about a protocol for staff at our center. Assuming ICE shows up with a judicial warrant, I know it's not the norm, and I'm hoping they don't have it, but assuming they do, so they get to enter our private space with say the arrest warrant is specifying a specific person. What is we do not have to help them in any way. Is that correct? But here's my fear. They're walking through, and we have a class full of English language students, and they're looking for one particular person. How is it going to play out? What's your best guess of how it will play out, and what should staff be doing in that situation?
It's a very good question. It's a question that lots of people have, and I'm going to give you my best guess at the answer, right? Because there's no definitive answer as to what
I thought.
it's organization by organization. But what we advise people to say, first of all, every organization, every workplace should have one person that's designated, right? 1 or 2 people who's designated. Everybody else should be trained to say, I am not authorized to allow you to enter, right? Not to let them in, right? There is nothing that requires, you said if they have a judicial warrant, right? I think it's very, very, very unlikely that there's going to be a judicial warrant that covers, I can search this entire Mercy Center for anyone I want, right? That's very, very unlikely. So most of the time, I'm going to talk about the more likely scenario, and then we can talk about the judicial warrant scenario. But the more likely scenario is that ICE comes to Mercy Center. Let's say they come to Mercy Center. They didn't come in the first Trump administration. They might come in the second Trump administration, right? So let's say they come to Mercy Center. The first, and I know that Mercy Center, you have to be, I think you have to be buzzed in, right? Or there's like,
I'm taking the position from our front door, right? There's like a glass door, you talk to the receptionist. Past that, the whole thing is private, and we're putting up signs because we don't let people just sit in our waiting room unless they're here for a program. So I mean, we'll pretend that we don't let the neighborhood people come in and use the bathroom. But yeah,
you're still giving them consent,
I'm okay with all that. But someone already asked me, well, what if they do have a judicial warrant? What do we do? So,
right. So yeah, so I'm gonna just say the first part, and then we'll say the second part. Okay. So the first part is, I'm not authorized to allow you to enter, right? Let's say they have a judicial warrant. That judicial warrant has to be reviewed by the person who's designated to review that judicial warrant, not anybody, right? So no, the person who's being presented with a judicial warrant, if they don't have the authority to allow somebody in, and I caution everybody to not give everybody this authority, right? I don't have the authority to review this. I don't have the authority to allow you to enter, right? You designate who you want to be responsible for that. That person will then read that judicial warrant. Most likely it's going to list, if there is one, it's going to list a person, right? Then it is for the supervisor, whoever it is, the person with authority, to decide, like, is that person here, right? If they are not there, they can obviously tell, they should not lie, but they can obviously tell ICE that person is not here, please leave, right? Yep. If that person is there, and I take the position that person, unless they're going to leave out the back, which they certainly have, they might do, if they are not going to leave out the back for whatever reason, they can come outside, right? And then the warrant no longer applies to the whole area. There is something called, and I hate the name of this, but there is something called a Blackie's warrant, which is related to a restaurant that was called Blackie's. And a Blackie's warrant is a warrant that has been found to be lawful. That may not always be the case, but is lawful if there is a basis for thinking that there are many people, there's many violations of the law happening inside of the violations of immigration law happening inside of a particular place, right? So I'm not talking about a Mercy Center where you guys are giving English classes, right? I'm talking about, in this particular scenario, it was believed that this restaurant was employing a lot of people who didn't have immigration status. So they thought that the employer was breaking the law. And so the warrant gave authority to enter that workplace to see if there were people breaking the law. And there is, in the Project 2025, reference to the Blackie's warrants being expanded and used more regularly. That said, I don't know of anybody having seen a judicial warrant in the past week. We know that there were ICE arrests made and that there were ICE going to places of business, and that business owners were saying you can't enter, right? Because you don't have a warrant. So we don't know. There may be judicial warrants that are issued, and we will sort of deal with that as it comes. But right now, keeping it as private and as narrowed to one person as possible. And they have to have some kind of probable cause. They have not just probable cause that somebody is an immigrant, but probable cause that a law has been violated in order to make it. That's what they're supposed to do.
If they're specifying that one person, they have to still find that person in our premises. So, but my inclination is nobody has to help them do that, but I am worried that they'll sweep up a lot of people.
Right. So you sort of let people know you have the right to remain silent, not to answer any questions. Like they're supposed to have probable cause. So we don't help them get that probable cause.
Okay.
We
Right.
don't give them IDs.
Right.
Hay una
And those are
pregunta,
just,
yo te la puedo leer. I
yeah,
can read you the question on the
yeah.
chat. Is ICE able to enter or make arrest at DHAs or HRA shelters?
Yeah, so thank you, Hector. So I'll go through some of these questions. But so the question that Hector just said, is ICE able to enter or make arrests at shelters? Yes, they can, but they have to be allowed in, right? So the shelters are private spaces. Just because they're city funded doesn't mean that they're not private spaces. So the shelter, we encourage the shelter staff to not allow ICE to enter. If they have a judicial warrant, then you would accompany them to the specific room of the specific shelter unit. That doesn't give them authority over all of the units, right? And then it is up to the person inside that home, whether they're going to open the door or whether ICE is going to force entry. But again, we haven't seen judicial warrants. If you see them, please let us know, but we haven't seen them. So we're talking a lot of if scenarios, but the more likely scenario is that ICE will say that they have a warrant and be lying. They will have an administrative warrant, not a judicial warrant. The other question in the chat is, what happens if you don't show your ID? Will they detain them? So that's what Alpha's question was. And I think Alpha, I may have answered that, but I'll try again. So we don't know, to be honest, if ICE will always detain somebody for not showing their ID. It kind of depends on the circumstances, right? So choosing not to show your ID, there is some case law that there can be what's called a negative inference that you are that gives rise to probable cause, but not necessarily, right? So I know people hate those lawyer answers of it depends, but it does kind of depend on what the other circumstances are at the time. But we encourage people to get IDs that don't have their country of origin on it. So getting an ID NYC. And, again, there's no law in New York that says you have to show your ID when asked for it. There's no law that says you have to show your ID when ICE asks for it. So I believe that they can ask for an ID. That doesn't mean you have to give it to them. Other questions?
There is an earlier question for an iPad. I don't know the name of the person. Do we know the length of the time citizens would be detained if they are rounded up in a raid?
So we don't know because it really depends on resources. But typically, and when they say citizens, I don't know if they mean U.S. citizens or if they just mean people. But let's assume they mean people. So do we know the length of time people would be detained if they're rounded up in a raid? So typically somebody, if they're arrested by ICE, they're brought to a processing facility, a local processing facility, and then they might be moved to a bigger like detention center, which are really just jails for the most part. And then they might be moved to another facility closer to the border or where they might be able to have people board a flight, a deportation flight. So it really depends. It depends on a lot of things. It also depends on whether there are travel documents for that person. So most of the time, ICE is not going to be able to deport somebody if they don't have a passport, but they do have ways around that, unfortunately. Any other questions? All right. Well, I thank you so much for your attention. Go ahead, Hector.
You just read comments or questions about the package, if it is going to be available before Monday.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to update the packets. I'm going to send them out over the weekend. Can't promise when. I have some things I need to do with my kids this weekend. But I will get them out before Monday, and I have to, get them all printed in advance as well. Go ahead, Carmen.
Thank you so much for all of this information. Just as a little bit of a caveat, I know that right now there's been a whole bunch of raids that happened in New Jersey, and none of them had neither administrative or judicial warrants. So they're doing it just like utilizing the terror and fear that people have to try to catch them by surprise and not even ask for anything and just do full on raids. And just so folks know, I know like when it comes to restaurants, we had that happen in the first Trump administration where a lot of restaurants were getting raided, particularly in Queens. And I do know that like the kitchen space and all those are private areas. So what they do is they round everybody up in the front and they don't ask any questions. They just take everybody so that way they'll ask questions after they have them detained. I don't know what the way is around that, but I do know that there's like a lot of questions for people to have like a number from ACLU or a number because we can say, you know, I need to get in contact with my attorney, but if they don't have a number to get in contact or ask any questions or somebody to invoke their rights, they become even more fearful because they become hopeless right there. So just to put that out there so folks know like there's stuff that we know that are people's rights and that opportunities that we have with the administrative and the judicial warrants. But the reality is that there's a pattern that's currently going on. And we know that New York, Chicago, and major cities like we're like at the top of the we're like the ones that they really want to put an example of because of the holding of sanctuary cities. They really want to make a lesson out of that in their authority of the federal government. So it's really important that we also recognize what does that mean for us? How do we stand strong and support each other? And I think organizations across the board have to figure out a way of not letting people in. Like Paula said, right? Like, no, it's all a private space. But then at the same time, there can be ramifications even for staff of organizations if you get in the way. They can also arrest you. And as they're picking up so many different people, they're picking up regular citizens as well and utilizing to say and saying that a lot of them are actually stopping, I guess, the process of whatever the case is, due process, and they're getting in trouble as well. So there's going to be an even bigger problem on our hands if we don't all figure out a really good plan, not just for those who are, undocumented, but even those of us who want to make sure that we're maintaining safety for the people that come into our workspaces.
Yep. I agree. Thank you, Carmen. Okay. Thank you all for your attention. I know we're 37 minutes over, but appreciate you all for being here. And